Sometimes, exploring means discovering more in another part of a place you've been before. I'm author and researcher Mike Luoma, and a while back I found some interesting stonework on my first visit to Essex, Vermont's Indian Brook Reservoir and Town Conservation Area. The park around the reservoir is vast. I was only able to explore the eastern side on that first trip. On my return, the western and northern sides had even more to reveal. There are a ton of stones around this reservoir. The glaciers dumped a lot here, providing plenty of raw material for later indigenous and colonial stonework. The brooks here even appear to be lined with stone at times. The pattern of stones in this opposite bank doesn't appear natural or random to my eyes. It occurs to me this could be recent work, done perhaps in attempting to purify water flows into the new reservoir when the dam was built in the late 1950s. But the pattern of the stones resembled Stone Serpent Effigy rows, including one I'd drawn as an example a day or two earlier. The Essex town history of the park points out that, although named for an Indian brook, there is currently no archaeological evidence of Abenaki settlement of Indian Brook Park. Though Native Americans did use the Indian Brook corridor extensively. My first visit here, I found old stone rows which appeared to be older than colonial constructs, possibly ancient serpent effigy rows. Up on the eastern ridge, I saw possible large-scale great serpent stonework. There is a growing understanding that the indigenous peoples of the Northeast worked with stone, constructing effigy rows and other Manitou or spirit stone assemblages. Some of these have been mistaken for later, post-contact settler work, assumed to be colonial stone walls and the stone heaps and clearing piles of early farmers. That view is changing. James Maver and Byron Dix's 1989 book Manitou helped shift thinking on these stoneworks. The more recent Stone Prayers by Massachusetts archaeologist Curtis Hoffman, released in 2018, provides extensive documentation and research on possible ritual stone constructs by the indigenous peoples of the Northeast. If we accept that indigenous peoples in this area worked with stone, then perhaps there is archaeological evidence of Abenaki settlement of Indian Brook Park. Especially in light of my second visit's discoveries. On the reservoir's western side, I found another possible stone row serpent effigy along the old McGee Road. Even more impressive, north of the pond, I found an enormous boulder incorporated into a stone row, creating a giant serpent effigy. Let's look at that big discovery first. A boulder in a spring drew my attention and first pulled me off the trail. It's unusual, a boulder marking a spring. And it struck me with the stones on the sides, it kind of looked like a frog. I hadn't been looking at the spring long when the stone row next to it grabbed my attention. It hadn't looked this interesting from the trail. Couldn't really see that it led up to a huge boulder from the trail, but it did. A boulder shaped like the head of a serpent. And turned at an angle, with the wall zigzagging up to it and onto it, to curve with it and make it look like the turning head of a great snake. The angle of the head could be oriented to a couple of things. It's a rather large boulder, so it's hard to tell for sure. Could be pointing towards the exit to the underworld at about 235 degrees southwest. Or it could be pointing towards the winter solstice sunset at about 253 degrees west-southwest. It's a large boulder, and I haven't yet looked for any landmarks it could have been pointing to create these alignments, so this is just speculation based on the angle of the head at this point. The stone row continues on downhill after the boulder, almost down to the water's edge, along the brook from the spring next to it. The stone row runs roughly north-south. Although it's just downhill from an old foundation, and not far from an old road, this possible serpent effigy's location seems to have protected it somehow. Next to this wetland spring. Its stone row adapted, perhaps by later settlers, to mark off a meadow. And it's not too visible from the trail. This certainly bears more looking into after this initial discovery. The other possible ancient serpent effigy stone row I came across was to the west of the reservoir, next to the old McGee Road. Approaching from the side, I didn't notice its zigzag at first, but the stones themselves spoke of great age. And up close it did, zig-zag. Like other ancient stone rows I've seen in Vermont, in places, the bank above this stone row filled in behind it. The construction so solid and sturdy the stones held. The stone row turned into an ersatz retaining wall. Following along to the east, the stone row soon ended at a couple of larger stones, which could be a serpent's head. The trail I was taking was heading west, so I turned back around, but did discover this old stone row kept going, in various states, for quite a ways to the west, beyond the point where the trail went north and I went away from the old road. The ridges on the western side seemed less steep than those on the east. Still, the trail, when it wound up and over the ridge, led past possibly perched boulders and stones, and some beautiful exposed quartz. This could be a Manitou stone, perched in the split between these boulders. Other stones struck me as possible stonework or as being augmented by human hands. Perhaps even the remains of large-scale Great Serpent stonework. This assemblage wasn't large enough for a person, but Indigenous peoples sometimes associate stonework with legends of little people. Maybe this is one of theirs. It was a day of unexpected discoveries on this second experience of Indian Brook Reservoir Park. I'm Mike Luoma. Thank you for experiencing this place with me.